I hate football. I absolutely hate football. The worst thing imaginable is for me to have to go to a football match. I can't think of
What?
anything worse.
You're a
Well, I
man.
sat next to David Beckham and didn't realise I was sat next to David Beckham. I had a lovely conversation with him.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Unedited with me, Ed Gould. So I've been listening back to a record we did a couple of months ago, or about a month ago, I think it was, with Matthew Leopold, who's a brilliant marketeer who I've known for some time, not very well, so it's really great to have a much more detailed conversation with Matthew. Matthew heads up brand and marketing for LexisNexis, which is a multinational global provider of insight and intelligence to the legal market. And he's also been lead roles in British Gas and a number of other large brands for utilities. And the other interesting thing about Matthew is he shares a passion and interest for the subject of sponsorship. So I am telling you guys, if you're a marketing leader or someone in the game that's interested in finding out how you really engage with a changing market like the legal profession, and how you manage the shift in technology that's being delivered through AI, then this is a really interesting conversation for you. If you're also interested in sponsorship and finding out why so many sponsorship fails go wrong, and now this is a really big subject for me. One of our most read blogs ever at Carswell Gould, the agency I work with, is the biggest sponsorship fails. People are fascinated with how big brands spend so much on these ego projects sometimes, and they fail. And Matthew has a unique insight to that, as he sits on the board of the European Council for Sponsorship. So he's able to tell us some really good stories there. We also get into subjects like managing mental health and burnout within the profession. The legal profession, which is a really interesting topic, especially as I bring to that side of it my work with the Solicitors Charity as well. So this unedited conversation really delves into lots of different parts of big brand marketing strategy, AI, technology, and also really the human side of what makes brands tick. And again, it digs into some really valuable lessons around sponsorship and getting the most out of it. Matthew is a verbose, brilliant, energetic speaker that I know you'll love, but we do have a couple of moments of bad sound quality. So bear with us as we go through this, because I guarantee it's worth your while. So if you're ready, I think you know the score by now. Let's sit back, relax, and get ready for another unedited conversation. Matthew, thank you for joining me today. It's great to see you. Now, dear listeners, I must confess I was late to this recording, so Matthew has told me he had plenty of time to prepare, so we're expecting big things. But as is the usual approach for these pods and these conversations, I wanted to start by inviting you to tell our listeners a bit about who you are, what you're doing, and a bit about your background, please.
Thanks, Ed. Well, hi everyone. It's great to be here. And indeed, Ed was shockingly 15 minutes late. And thankfully, this is probably the one question that I probably shouldn't have any need to prepare for. So I'm Matthew Leopold. I look after brand and everything top of funnel, basically, for global legal intelligence, legal technology company LexisNexis. And I look after everything there, from advertising, brand communications, thought leadership, product, analyst relationships, messaging, etc., etc. And it's a really interesting business and a really interesting job, because actually we're going through an enormous transformation. It's a business that's more than 200 years old, and we specialize in legal publishing. We curate and then create legal content that lawyers use when they make decisions and use to help them do their jobs. And over the last 20 years, we've been a legal publisher that uses technology to distribute that content. And since I joined the business 5 or so years ago, that's turned around, and we're now really a legal tech company that's grounded on content. So that is a huge and fundamental shift, and obviously really exciting with AI technologies that are coming in. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later if the prep question I was given to think about it comes true. But that then obviously creates a really interesting brand challenge for me and for the business, which is quite a good fun one to work through.
And I definitely do want to get into that, but I don't want to go there too soon because that in itself is a huge and really interesting subject. Take us back in time, though. How did you get into marketing? What was the journey that got us to this point, Matthew?
So I started in general management, believe it or not. I thought I wanted to run a business. I saw leaders, yeah, particularly in my early career, standing up at conferences and sharing a vision and bringing people together. I thought, I can do that. I want to do that. I want to run a business. And as my career sort of veered towards the operational side of running a business, I kind of realized it wasn't the thing that I was most passionate about. It's
Okay.
definitely that commercial side has always stayed with me, that interest in running a business and interest in driving an enterprise forward. But actually, the thing I realized that got me excited, got me energized, got me interested was the telling of a story, the challenging and the changing of perceptions, making people think differently. And that's where I kind of realized it was marketing was the thing that I really wanted to do, or certainly the thing I wanted to drive my career. And I started my career at British Gas, a brilliant, brilliant business, but a business that is no, everyone has an opinion on British Gas, and regrettably, many of those opinions, or maybe rightly, depending on where you come from, those opinions are quite negative. And the question for me, looking after brand for British Gas, was how on earth do you build brand affection or affinity or consideration for a brand that has so many detractors? Um,
I think that this is the first point we should get into. Commodity selling, that it comes with huge baggage, British Gas or similar organizations. So when you stepped into that role, what level were you coming in at that point when you joined? Was it a leadership role or was it a delivery role? And where did you exit? And what was that journey like? And what were the experiences like in British Gas? Because I very much recognize what you're talking about. It's a commodity and a utility. And if you're anywhere else in the world, you'll have your utilities in the same way. How do you build loyalty? Why should anyone care about it when it's just the gas that comes through, etc.? So how did you enter into that? And what was that journey like?
Totally. So I started my career at British Gas. So I went right the way through from being a doer to taking on a more senior leadership role, right the way through. And one of the joys of working for a big corporate is as soon as you think you're comfortable in a role, as soon as you think you've mastered a role, it's time for you to move. It's time for it to be changed. And that usually it's complementary, the roles you get shuffled into, but they're always stretching you in different areas. And I think I probably had some of my greatest, most fundamental learning points as I was going through that journey. So you talk about loyalty. I did a period of time working on our Nectar loyalty program. And what that showed me was that actually loyalty is a really complicated beast. And if you're aspiring to make people loyal to your business, you can't just reward them with gifts and with points.
Mm.
People actually aren't loyal. They're only as loyal as they are for a moment in time. So to build loyalty, you need to really dig deep, deep, deep roots into a brand and into the customer to understand why would they want to be loyal. Because ultimately, when it comes down to spending money, soon as someone comes in a little bit cheaper, that loyalty can be really quickly eroded, particularly in a commodity. So a lot of the work that I did was looking at actually how can we use that knowledge to create products or propositions or marketing campaigns such as sponsorship to try and make those roots as deep as possible. Because frankly, it's a commodity. The product you get is exactly the same if it's from British
Mm.
Gas or from a competitor. So we had to really think about how we approached our customers. It was good
Well,
fun.
it's one of those spaces where, from a pure marketing point of view, there's not much you can do with the product. The product is the product, and therefore you're pulling on all of these different levers. And it's quite a price sensitive, certainly sure it is all over the world. It's a price sensitive space. But I really recognize that idea. If all you do is play with price, why should anyone stick around for that long? So what type of initiatives did you guys bring in that were designed to sort of go beyond commodity and beyond price and drive that sort of brand loyalty? What sort of things were you doing there?
So there are a couple of things that I think were really interesting, and I'm looking back with hindsight, I'm pretty proud of. So I'll talk firstly about our education program. So one of my final roles before I left the business was looking after what we call Generation Green, which was the program that went out into schools and educated children and provided materials to schools to teach children about energy. Now you might go, well, what on earth are you talking about? Why, yes, we can see the CSR benefits of educating children, but what was the commercial grounding on that? How is that going to shift brand? How is that going to shift product? And actually, it was pretty simple. The theory, and yeah, to some extent, we quite clearly proved it, was utilizing education, utilizing children to educate their parents, because the energy market is actually really complicated. Like you to understand a kilowatt hour, to understand a firm, to understand how you can save money, to understand smart metering and how looking at a number that's telling you what you're consuming can lead to a reduction in consumption and change your mindset around energy. If you explain that to adults at the level you need to explain it, you're actually talking to a 6 or 7 year old. So why not speak to the 6 or 7 year old, create homework that they need to take home, get the parents involved in the exploration, they're looking at the meter numbers and learning about energy in their own home, and then hopefully you're providing that education right into the parents, not just to the children. So I thought it was quite a good. It took us a
I
long
think
time to get there.
it also touches on something that goes beyond. I mean, we have with my agency hat on, we have like a value which is don't put something into the world, and I won't swear to you because I know you're very polite man, but don't put poop into the world. Those sorts of initiatives, which, yeah, sure, there's the cynic in you might say, well, it's a CSR play, it's just, but actually, young people understanding basic things like where energy comes from,
Sure.
or how to cook food, or how to prepare for the future. There is a value in there that makes you feel good as in your role, I bet, where you think this is not just the normal day job. This is impacting beyond product here. This might actually be useful to people moving forward. And I think that gives you a lot of confidence as you move forward into your next spaces if you have those. So that's a great initiative and a great idea. What was the other one you were thinking of?
So probably around sponsorship as a whole, and
Okay.
yeah, we took on. We'll talk about sponsorship in a little bit, and I sponsorship is just fascinating.
Yeah.
It can be such a powerful marketing tool, and it can be an enormous waste of time. And what I found through my work with sponsorship is we swung from the enormous waste of time to really impactful, to a bit of a waste of money, to much more impactful. It takes time, it takes experimentation to figure these things out. And yeah, ultimately, we'll talk about it shortly, but really understanding what we were trying to achieve and how the assets could help us achieve it was critical to unlocking the solution. And we did get there in the end, but it was a lot of work, and we definitely made quite
Well,
a lot of
we're
mistakes.
gonna so keep listening, people, because we're gonna get really into sponsorship later. Because obviously, something we've not mentioned so far is you're a board member at the European Sponsorship Association, the ESA, since 2016, and so you've seen firsthand the good, the bad, and the ugly of sponsorship. You've probably also spent a lot on sponsorship in your time and been involved in those programs. Me, on the flip side, I've had to deliver such programs and try. So we'll dig into that a bit more. But let's stick with this idea of this career path. And so you're in British Gas, and you're trying to find ways of making the brand resonate, and it's a commodity. What lessons from that time transfer into, and I'm thinking about, it's a fairly risk averse sort of space. What parallels can you bring into the legal market when you move into LexisNexis?
Yeah, surprisingly lots. And,
Okay.
and and in fact, yeah, a lot of my career has come from this idea that actually to communicate the value behind a commodity brand, or to communicate the value behind a brand that people don't want to like, teaches you have to really think of different ways and different
Yeah.
methods to convey your message. So yes, okay, in the world of LexisNexis, we're wonderful. We are a highly trusted brand. We're a highly respected brand, and people like our brand. That's wonderful. But actually, as you hint, it is in a highly risk-averse industry.
Yeah.
And risk is, well, it's actually it's a beautiful emotion, and I think so much of marketing we forget about emotion. But actually, risk is a really powerful thing to play with, and risk is a bit of a double-edged sword. We can look at, yeah, well, we can market to risk, and I've done that. It's like, what is the risk of not buying our product? And that's a really easy way of conveying the message. You need to buy us, or else something's going to go wrong. But it is a very negative form of messaging, and yeah, it works to some extent. But if you keep pushing on the risk and keep pushing on the downside, then it could become a bit of a spiral. So definitely need to find more of a balance in
Mm.
in how we manage that sort of risk averse side of things. Because don't forget, when you buy a lawyer's advice, you are basically buying risk mitigation, right? So when you buy a house, you don't go to a conveyancer because you just have to go to a conveyancer. You go there because you want someone else to tell you if there are any big pitfalls, or with an insurance policy, if there are any big pitfalls that your decision might be. And same in business. The reason you bring a lawyer involved is so that they can tell you, are you making a sensible decision on this or not? So when we market to risk, we're sort of tapping into that little niggle
Mm.
that they have in their mind about the risk of them potentially making a mistake or getting it wrong, or the risk of failure, or the risk of not doing something, the risk of losing out. And yeah, it is negative.
Certainly, from my observation, both very safe brands we've talked about. You know, they're both very solid brands. But the reason of why I should care, I guess, is the thing that comes up the most. And there's probably a bit more range for innovation, and we'll get onto that with the AI conversation in a minute. But from that, with your brand hat on, how do you balance off that risk, and what other levers are you pulling in that space as the marketing lead and the brand lead?
So I think you're absolutely spot on that the flip to risk is about trust and therefore transparency, and openly addressing, and it's certainly something that we do, openly addressing those potential risks in marketing helps to display and demonstrate transparency and honesty, which helps to build the sense of trust. And I think it's really easy to stand for something, but that's not necessarily as powerful as standing against something. And I think that's
I
the other.
totally agree. Everyone's got a cause, but
Yeah,
actually, you know, it does resonate a lot more when someone says an opposing view about something than just agreeing with everything.
yeah, completely. And I mean, this is it, right? Emotion. We often hear that B2B sales are made only with the head, and then B2C purchases are made with the heart, which is, clearly you agree, right? It's
It's
absolute
rubbish.
nonsense.
It's absolute rubbish.
Right.
People are humans. Everyone feels.
Exactly. And I've been formulating a theory actually over the last year or two that I think B2B purchases have more heart in them than a B2C purchase, right? I actually think the importance of that
Okay,
gut
hang on.
instinct is more
So what
important.
you're
Okay,
what
we're
you're
going off topic now.
suggesting? No, I like it. I like it. So your suggestion is, because I would agree with you that the taught is a B2B piece is more head. You never get fired for buying IBM. I hate that. Yeah, it's one of my least favorite phrases because it kills every ounce of imagination. And as a creative director, it makes me redundant. So but this idea that actually you're saying you would expect that a B2C purchase we really care about it. But what you're proposing is it's the other way around?
To some extent, so actually, your point about IBM is actually my point. But let me. I
Go
think
for it.
we need to balance things out, right? If I'm spending my money, right, my personal money, and I'm going to buy a vacuum cleaner. If I buy a rubbishy vacuum cleaner, then buy cheap, buy twice, right? My wife will grumble at me, and my bank balance will be sad, and
Well, it's
it'll
not a very good
hurt.
birthday present for
But
your wife, a vacuum cleaner. You'll
quite.
get in a lot of trouble for that.
You'll move on, you'll forget about it, right? So you
Yeah.
might buy a Hoover or a Shark or whatever brand you choose to buy because that's where you might have some. I mean, it's a really stupid example, but actually, your head's looking at it in terms of value, in terms of the features. When you're buying a B2B purchase, you're buying something that is probably worth several £100,000, And therefore, the risk of a mistake happening is huge, right? Your job's on the line, your reputation's on the
The
line, your
social
livelihood.
risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you see where I'm going here, right? So actually, when a brand talks to your heart and says, it's fine, right? You can trust us, you can be safe with us, we'll look after you, we care about you, we care about what you're doing, we can give you the confidence the decision you're about to make is a safe, sensible choice, then actually that brand's gonna win. And warmth and safety and reassurance and all those kind of, well, that's brand, right? That's heart. So
Mm.
my theory is, in a big B2B purchase, we need to do much, much more emotional marketing rather
And
than
you're in
just
a
the hard.
software space as well. I love this because, if we talk about traditional, and it's weird to talk about traditional in software space, but I would argue that traditionally it's a fairly sales orientated approach. There's not a lot of room for the sorts of ideas you're talking about. I represent a number of sort of tech and software and providers, big ones, and getting them to think about that. You can really pick out the ones that do a good job of the feel aspect. In my world, and maybe some of the listeners here will be using stuff like Adobe, and they do a good job of trying to connect on that feel bit. But on the whole, software is not going nuts on the human aspect of brand. So was this something you had to bring people with? Is this something in LexisNexis was new, or was there already a culture of this human to human communications that, brand building?
I think, taking Lexus out of the equation, I think most brands kind of understand it. They kind of see it, but it gets lost in the fact that in a B2B world, you're on a quarterly or annual cycle. And
And the
therefore,
reporting, yeah.
it's all about the delivery of leads and MQL and SQL, and then ultimately through to a sale. So you must never lose sight of that, because that is the measure of success and the measure of performance. But actually starting to articulate and prove that this sort of mindset change is going to help. Well, it is really important, but it is quite difficult. And so the LN have been really receptive to thinking this way. And I think actually AI technologies have been a really big part of that, because what AI allows you to do is it allows you to say, is what I'm currently doing the right thing in the right way? Could I find a new way of doing it using AI? Now, the answer is quite often yes, but sometimes no. But the fact that you're asking yourself, could we do this differently in a different way, is opening people's minds up to new ideas and new ways of thinking and new methodologies of doing marketing. And certainly in the legal industry, we're not just selling a product about legal AI. We are literally transforming an entire way an industry works. So that again means that the business is eyes wide open. We're doing more than we've ever had to do before, and we need to think differently about it. And so yeah, I think I'm seeing more change at the moment than I've seen before.
And I think this is the meat in the sandwich of this conversation, really, in the middle, which is, I can only agree with you that people are opening up and having to think differently about, and there's still preconceived notions of cost savings or what you don't need, and that's impacting every part of the marketing function and the business intelligence function. And really, what has been interesting about looking at what you guys are up to in a space that, to contextualize this to our listeners, in a space where you're effectively retailing information and intelligence to law firms to speed up their processes. And if I get this wrong, you'll correct me, but in a traditional sense, you've got one of the largest databases of sort of information, and that's what they're buying into. AI is an absolute, and I hate the word game changer. it's a game changer, but with it comes huge risk, because suddenly you've got you've got to think about, what's the threat that this risk averse industry that we play into, and the legal industry or the professional services industry as a whole. So let's get into that. How do you begin as the leader and the person in charge of this, when you're hearing all of this great stuff that's going to revolutionize, bring new products out? How do you guys, from a leadership point of view, start maneuvering what you're going to do from a product point of view, and then how that travels through to a proposition and etc. So the core marketing bit, as you started playing with AI, which I know you're leading on there, can you tell us a bit about and contextualize in a better way than I have, really the shift that is going to provide within the industry, which will impact every single listener in one way or another. So give us a bit of an overview and then the journey on that.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we are sitting, as you say, on literally one of the world's largest collections of legal content and information. So, when a lawyer needs to find out what the law says, they can go and they can look on public access sources, but they're not actually, believe it or not, as up to date or as comprehensive as you might like. And we have all of that legal content, but it's not just that. We also have the interpretation as to what it means and how it applies with pre-written precedents and checklists and stuff like that. So essentially, it's like if you think back to your time at school, you'd have the text of the Lord of the Flies, the original text. You would then have the York notes that explain to you actually what does the Lord of the Flies mean, what are the essay questions, and what are the essay plans to those essay questions, and then what are the quotes you ought to be aware of, what are the things you need to think about for each. And that's essentially what we hold the core content. We also hold the interpretation, the commentary, and the guidance as to what to do with that content. Then when you imagine we've got this enormous collection of legal content, we're adding about 1.5 million documents a day to this content. Now, I tell you, it is, the law is a moving, growing beast. Then when you start to apply large language models to all of that content and the ability to extract the materials that are relevant and then create and formulate answers that meet lawyers' questions and lawyers' needs and write documents for them, you can begin to see just how enormously transformational this technology can be in a world where the legal industry is entirely written, right? It is all about writing documents, writing contracts, writing letters, writing briefings. It is all written word. So the ability to bring these technologies to the law, it is absolutely transformational. And then you've got to remember that not only is it transformational to the work they do, the knock-on implications to the wider legal market are massive. Right? It is an industry that lives and dies by the billable hour. Okay, it is the number that people are targeted on, and that's okay. We're starting to see in some areas new methods coming through, but fundamentally it is the core metric in the industry. Well, how on earth do you hold a billable hour when suddenly you can do 4 hours worth of work in the one billable hour? So something's going to have to change. Maybe the billable hour value is going to have to shoot up, or maybe we need to find new ways of pricing, new ways of managing the workload that's being done.
Well, you're touching on a subject that is similar in our world. I mean, agencies charging a billable hour. And so we'll come back to that. But just to clarify that position. So up until now, the way that you guys make your money is through the referencing of those resources. And it's a subscription model, or talk a bit about the old way and maybe your view, the vision for the new way that would work, and how that actually hits the road in terms of me as a law firm, just to try and bring that alive for us.
Sure. Well, as I said at the beginning, we are a legal publisher. So we create the content, we curate the content, we assess the content, and we own it. It's gated. You buy a subscription to access it and read it. Yeah. In ye olden days, it used to be textbooks. So if you watch Suits, you see all of those books in the library that they go to. Well, those are, our books, and there are other suppliers available, but there are books. And you would have to have, in ye olde day, gone and get a physical textbook out and then read around it and then looked at the citations and then gone and done that terribly manual way of doing research. Then as technology moved on, they essentially became PDFs or searchable documents, or they were available on a portal as it was back then, and then onto websites. Again, all gated content, but it then began to bring much more advanced searching was available. And as technology moved on, searching became more rigorous, which meant that you could start to pull out and get better insights. Then most recently, with machine learning and with extractive AI, we've been able to take that even further. So you could write your human language question, and we would then be able to help work out what you needed and find dots between the content using huge architecture and of data and really clever search strings. The final frontier now is the ability to put AI and large language models to access that content, so that literally you can ask it a question and then chat to Lady Law essentially as if she was sat next to you. You could ask further questions. You can dig down into the depths and the nuances of the law. You can start to build arguments using technology in a way that previously would have taken a huge amount of time and effort to bring together. You can summarize cases, so really get to the heart of what the law actually says. Whereas before, you'd have to go and read a judgment. That could be a 2 or 3 hour task, which you can't charge the client for, by the way. You can't charge 2 or 3 hours for going to read case law that probably you could have and should have known already. So to be able to do that in 30 seconds is an enormous time saver. And then the next hurdle, oh, sorry, I
No, keep going.
The next hurdle then is, how do we get the right content in the right place at the right time? So how can we put all of that material sit natively within Microsoft Word, so that actually as you're, the old clippy, hey, it looks like you're writing a legal contract to sue Edward Gould to make sure you make more money out of him. Would you like me to write that for you?
It's happened before.
Suddenly this all speeds things up, right? It's at your fingertips, which makes it so much more valuable.
I think, so let me pose a slightly tougher question. What, as the people that are changing, and you guys really are at the front of this, and from what I've been reading up, you're already there on most of this. You're getting to that point, and you're trying to work out how it hits the road in terms of the perception. But what responsibility do you feel as an organization that's fundamentally shifting the value of those solicitors? It could be perceived in one of two ways or one of multiple ways. But what responsibility do you feel for taking that market with you? And what initiatives are you, as a brand leader, if we go back to that feel bit and that human bit, how are you going to make them embrace this in the fullest way, rather than, and if we go right to the beginning, this risk-averse, very cautious space? How are you thinking about that, and how does that feel at this stage?
Well, firstly, hey, because clearly you've read our marketing materials and they're clearly communicating what I wanted them to communicate. So that's a win.
Tick.
But you're absolutely
correct.
I'm
not your customer, so
no, that which is a fair point. But yeah, again, so the burden of responsibility actually is quite significant. We are one of the largest legal technology suppliers in the world, and as such, we are innovating and we are bringing new technologies to market faster than others, which means that we are driving this change. We are actively the ones at the forefront of change. So we need to be very respectful of the trusted position that we as an organization hold, and that when we say or do something, we need to make sure that we set a standard that is acceptable, because that's a brand reputational issue. If we are bringing something to the market, if we are selling a product that we're giving huge promises as to what it does, but it doesn't deliver, that then just erodes the trust that we have spent 200 years building in the legal market.
I want to take us back briefly to the innovation around AI and the pressures on the legal space, and that conversation about what the future looks like for you guys and how you're gonna navigate that. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is a client partner of mine, which is the Solicitors Charity, which I've mentioned to you in the past. And it struck me as you were talking earlier, when we think about risk and we think about the levers that we can pull, the recent reports that came up for that, they've never had more requests for support than now. And we're in a time when especially young people are probably suffering more than they should. And one of the things that comes up consistently in the reporting, and for context to the listeners, the Solicitors Charity represents solicitors around UK and Wales, England and Wales. And they help solicitors in their times of need. And what's been amazing over the last few years is seeing this increase. And the increase is often due to burnout. And obviously one of the key things that you are potentially offering is a reduction on that burnout, that ability for people to spend more good time on the things that really matter, the relationships with the client, listening to the client. How do you begin to have that conversation though when the solicitor's saying you're cutting through my earning? Are you guys going to start releasing this to the market? Like, can I just access that information for free? What types of feedback, good and bad, have you had so far? And how do you see that future proposition going? And what's your plans, if you're allowed to share some of those?
Yeah, so I think it is a really, really interesting topic, and mental health and burnout in the legal industry is a huge issue because the pressure and the burden on junior lawyers to work, bill is insane. Yeah, we hear stories of people just not taking annual leave for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Like no annual. Admittedly, they're walking away with £250,000 a year, a lot of money, if not way more than that. But at what cost? And yes, AI quite potentially could slash some of that the effort they need to put in. So yes, there is a very, very real chance that they will be able to get a better balance on their lives through being able to work faster. But actually, fundamentally, there is quite a big shift in mindset that is needed, because will just working faster mean that they're not going to have to work as many
Mm.
hours? Is the work just going to fill all of that space? Are we creating in the legal industry busy fools because they are targeted on an hour target rather than an output? They're targeted on the outcome of hitting your hours. And that I think is it's a marketing issue, right? Do you talk about
It's an
outputs
issue
or
in
outcomes?
many industries. It's an issue in many industries, and it's one that I think um, is worth touching on a bit. From with my agency hat on, that the tradition has been, and I've talked about this a lot in some of the other podcasts because it is such a burning issue at the moment, that hourly rate piece. And for a long time now, we've been trying to move away or around that from results based, and the legal industry obviously offers a clear idea of a results based outcome. But it is a huge culture shift, and it comes back to that responsibility of the leading brand within the market. And actually, as you were speaking there, it almost feels like you're going back to your first great idea. You're going back to the kids and re-educating from those students that are coming through the qualifications of being a lawyer, that there is another way, because the old guard are going to keep going the way they were, and we've got to find that shift. But it's such an exciting opportunity in that space, because I don't think I've heard, and I've spoken to a lot of different people in a lot of different industries about the power of AI and the hope for it, but there's not really a cleaner example I can think of speeding up process and the potential benefit in a world where some people can't get representation, some people aren't getting justice. What impact that could have on society, I think, is something that I would be very excited about in your shoes as well, because it goes beyond product again. It goes towards social impact. I think that's a really cool thing to be involved with. What are your plans over the next year with it then, from an actual delivery point of view, and where? And then we're going to get on to this conversation of sponsorship a bit, but just to round off that conversation of this AI transformation and these new products, how do you see it manifesting over the next year or so?
So I think we've had a lot of early adopters. I think that no lies, we are staggered by the reception to the technologies. Now, I'm the son of two lawyers, and my father would always make the joke as how many lawyers does it take to change a light bulb? To which the answer is change. We don't change. So suddenly we're now seeing, latest statistics suggest that 82% of the legal market are either currently using generative AI in their work or plan to very shortly. That is enormous, considering that back in July last year, it was 11% currently using, and then
Wow.
about 20% thinking about using.
And
So
they're using any off-the-shelf tools that
yeah,
have open source models, and there's risk involved in that, and et cetera, et cetera. So what an opportunity.
totally. So it is a market that doesn't want to change, but is already has reluctantly in some cases and excitedly in other cases gone, yeah, if I'm not using this technology, I can see that I'm going to start losing out. And yeah, I think that has been a very big driving force. So we're going to see those early adopters have used it. It's going to be embedded within firms. I think, as I mentioned, you making sure that it's not just a tool that sits outside of the workflow. It's a tool that is just
Embedded.
integrated and embedded. Exactly right. At the moment, you have to go into ChatGPT if you want to use ChatGPT, or if you've got Copilot, it is better embedded within Word. It pops up saying, I can help you summarize this or whatever. So it's getting better. And I think that's the next step, as to how we can pipe our content exactly where you need it. So if it's in a Word document or in Microsoft Teams, the ability to run that processing in the workflow is going to be a really important next step.
And so from a marketing and a brand point of view, it's feeling like what you're talking about is evolution, not revolution, and not big bang statements, but just that consistent digital transformation and representation of the legal market and caring about what they're doing. Is that a good way of thinking about your approach to the brand and marketing challenge, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think we've had the big step, right? The big step is nothing to this is coming, this exists. And
Yeah.
we created a campaign, an insiders program, if you will, that people opted in. I mean, people opted into receiving our marketing because we deliberately didn't tell them about product. We were deliberately being a thought leader in the world of AI technologies, in the world of the law. So we got thousands and thousands of people opting into our marketing program about AI. And we just tried to slowly boil the ocean, essentially, talking about why people would use it, getting rid of some of the misconceptions about it. So I think we've done the first big step change. Now what we need to do is we just need to consolidate that. We need to get people comfortable with understanding its limitations. Really important, right? It is not perfect. It will never be perfect because of how it works. But then explaining what the guardrails are and how you can use it. And if you use it well at the beginning, if you use it in a specific sort of way, then the results you get will be much more powerful. Teaching people how to check and validate the sources that have been used. We've got citations. You just click through and you can look at the underlying content.
Yeah.
But again, you just got to build people's confidence and trust that this is that they can see how it's going to make a difference to them. And I think that's what we're going to continue.
It goes back to that humanization of it as well, because there is an element of, I predict and I feel, a little AI fatigue. if I've had some more, and it comes from the fact that it's such an easy thing to talk about at a top level, but when you really get down to how that applies. So I've worked with a couple of software providers in different spaces, and obviously, where's your AI proposition? Where's your AI proposition? But actually, once you've gone there, how is that landing from a human point of view? What benefit does that bring to me? Is a much more interesting conversation, because otherwise, all you're saying is AI over and over again. And if any of you out there listening look on your Instagram now, I challenge you, if you're in marketing, that your algorithm doesn't shove AI, some of them quite questionable products with very little time spent on them. And the risk is that not all AI is created equal, even though we're sort of being told. So how you as a business are using that, and how that hits me as an individual, as one of your readers, one of your brand advocates, is probably the more interesting thing from a communications challenge, for sure. It's certainly what we're trying to dig more into. Okay, let's pause and breathe. Dear listeners, what we have here is one of my favorite subjects now, which is sponsorship. And I'm so pleased when I found out that Matthew is as passionate as I am about what I will describe as the utter ego-fueled waste of money that, as marketeers, you all listening seem to keep committing to. And I'll kick us off, if I may, sitting on the agency side and watching 5 times the amount that we're getting paid to activate something, to be paid for a sponsorship so a CEO can turn up at the F1, is something that at first I found thrilling, exciting, the first few things I did. Then I started sort of thinking, hang on, this doesn't make sense. And now I'm appalled by, because you're talking about, in businesses, you're talking about vast sums of money being committed to activity with an expectation that routinely doesn't get met. And one of the, for 30 years, my agency's been going, and still our highest rated piece of content in terms of SEO is a story called Sponsorship Fails. And so it's obviously something that the market is interested in. And obviously you could lose your job for getting it wrong. So talk to me as someone from the inside in the ESA that looks at these things. What's your take on sponsorship, corporate sponsorship? And tell me a little bit about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and your position on it.
Sure. So, firstly, I am the biggest advocate for sponsorship that there is. I believe it is the most powerful marketing tool that marketeers have available to them. Because as I've already explained, I think emotion is critical. If you can play to people's emotion, if you can, get their gut instinct, if you can, lean in on something that is relevant and emotionally connected to them, then you have got one of the most powerful marketing tools available, because marketing to emotion is incredible. However, exactly as you said, if you don't do that, and you don't do it well, you don't do it properly, or you do it for the wrong reasons, sponsorship is the single biggest waste of time and money and effort. And it is enormously frustrating as someone who does consultancy into the sponsorship market, as someone who sits on the European Sponsorship Association board, as a former head of sponsorship, etc., etc. It does my head in how so many simple things get forgotten because the bright, sparkly, shiny things syndrome kicks in. And I'm going to completely embarrass myself here. I don't have a sports team that I follow, right? I'm not really. I'm terrible. Yeah.
You're a man.
I hate football. I absolutely hate football. The worst thing imaginable is for me to have to go to a football match. I can't think of anything worse. Well, obviously, there's many things worse, but it's just no interest. I sat next to David Beckham and didn't realize I was sat next to David Beckham and had a lovely conversation with him, not knowing I was sat next to him. So now I am really in popular culture. I'm broadly aware of, but I am absolutely not pulled into the shiny, sparkly thing syndrome, which is a positive and definitely a negative in some ways. But I think fundamentally there are a few key things that are problematic with sponsorship.
Okay.
And I think everything boils down to one issue. And this is common to all of marketing, but it is so bad in sponsorship. And the question is, what is the business problem that you're trying to fix? Right? If you can't define what the business problem you're trying to fix is, then how do you know what the insight is? How do you know what marketing channels to use? How do you know what advertising vehicle you're going to use? How do you know which segments you're going to target with your email campaign, etc., etc.? You've got to define a business problem. But in sponsorship, if the business problem is, how do I ensure the chief executive gets to go to an event and sit next to someone who's really influential, then yeah, maybe then sponsorship is the answer. But actually, you could just buy them a ticket, right? There are many
and
easier ways.
You then become his PA, not his marketing advisor.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the thing we talk a lot about, what you've made me think of there, I routinely use something called cornerstones. So boiling the brand down to sort of 4 cornerstones that I can use as a guide. And if it's not ticking at least 3 of them, what are we doing? So it sounds like a similar sort of way. But I also know from experience that there's sometimes when the CEO just goes, I don't really care about your cornerstones, or, this is, Bob's involved and I really want to get involved. And there's the just fucking do it, excuse my language, mentality, which some of our listeners will, and I'm sure that you've had experiences where you just have to sort of let it go.
Yep.
But what I find, and this is a moan, this isn't really a point, this is a moan. This is just a moan. Why then do they turn around and ask, how successful was that? So what tips could you give to our marketing leaders that are listening to manage that process in a better way? Because there's going to be times when either we want to activate sponsorship because we want to buy into a unique club or into a unique space or in an audience, and I get that, and it can be wonderful. But what steps, when you guys are talking about this in terms of the Sponsorship Association, is there sort of some basic steps that marketing leaders or principals that they should consider that you could give us a bit of a rundown of?
Yeah, so I have, of course, been at the receiving end of the so-called chairman's whim, where you just do it. It is what is expected of you. You just need to do it, and yeah, then it comes out of my budget, which you then have to start thinking about. Okay, what are the other sacrifices I need to make? And if it's funded separately and it's like then that's fine. Okay, we could just deal with it. It's out of your budget. I'll activate it for you, no problem. I will call out the risks, and to my my undoing, perhaps I will be quite honest. I will be quite blunt about where the potential opportunities and problems lie.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I then will I like to intellectualize a problem. So if I know that the answer is this sponsorship, I will put an enormous amount of effort and thought into, okay, if that is the answer, what is the question that leads me to that answer? And then how can that question be a business problem, and to try and join them together. And it doesn't always work and it's not always smooth. But if I can do that, then at least I can start to show the benefit that it's going to have.
Yeah. So
And
stage one, connect it to one of your key objectives. And if you can't connect it, you've got a bit of a problem there because, wow, why are you doing it at all? So we've now got our sponsorship opportunity, and our business problem is we want to open a new market within the marine industry. So we'll sponsor a boat show, we'll get involved. What sort of advice do you have for people that have got to that stage in terms of the amount of work it takes to activate a sponsorship? I mean, we talk in our agency about a 3 times multiplier, and that's not because we're trying to sell you loads of work. It's because from experience, if you're spending 100 grand on the sponsorship thing and you're not spending 3 times that in resource and effort to actually make the most of it, it's great on the day,
yeah.
but it's not really resonating. Have you got any tips or sort of advice around that space?
So I personally think that you're too low on your multiplier.
Wow, okay.
I would
right,
suggest
good.
it needs to be closer to 6.
Wow, 6
and then,
times multiplier.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, because ultimately, if you're just, you need to, it's like a marketing campaign, right? How much are you going to spend on the creative and the creative vehicle, and how much are you going to spend on the media buy, right? I imagine it's substantially more than 6 times. But, so why should sponsorship be any different? They are rights that you've bought. It is a channel that you purchase. You then need to make sure that you're maximizing the value through that channel. And that might be experiential. That might not be. It might be using your existing marketing channels and your existing marketing assets, but bringing the sponsorship into them in a way that is relevant and appropriate. So it's not a very simple 6 time. Now, obviously, when you're down at the smaller end of the market, when you're spending 100,000, well, 6 times that is probably excessive. So I think it's probably a bit more of a logarithmic type curve. But yeah, I think all too often.
Well, when you get to the high end of the market, you're so lost among the other sponsors as well. I mean, it's nuts. If we just took one of our clients out of F1 and we had a discussion, that you have no reason to be there. I mean, you're spending half of your budget just on that piece. And it was such a busy space full of other brands that were in this, it was an absolute no-brainer for someone that's not an F1 fan. You said rather ashamedly you're not a football fan. Well, I think it helps. I think that helps a lot not to be pulled along in that way. But when I looked at this thing, I was like, I don't like F1. It's not my game, or what if it is a game. So it was very quick to say, you're lost in this space. There's other brands that are bigger, that are doing more. And unless you can really be a hero in that space and own that sponsorship opportunity, I just can't see the point in it, even though we will always look for what that, and we talk here about planning in sort of a hum, sing, shout. There's the day-to-day hum. There's the sings that maybe there's a few through the year that are your key campaigns. But usually the sponsorship piece is the big shout. You're expecting a hell of a lot from that. So the idea that you're not going to put a hell of a lot of effort into it, it boggles the mind that people in our industry are still not grasping this. And they think success is turning up, having a glass of champagne and then leaving at the end. It's bizarre.
Oh, wait, and that brings me on to the next bugbear that I have in the world of
Oh,
sponsorship,
this is
and
good. We're
and
really getting into it.
and,
Yeah.
and that is measurement and evaluation, right? I
Okay.
I I would spend a good percentage of my budget on the measurement and evaluation of sponsorship. And I think one of the big issues when you have an ego-driven sponsorship, and okay, that's really laden term, but when you have a sponsorship that hasn't gone, we've got a problem with declining sales in this market for this reason, and this is the solution. And then, okay, oh, so sponsorship is the solution and these assets, right? If you do it that way, then that's quite logical, right? You know exactly what you're going to measure to be successful because you've got declining sales in this geography with it, blah, 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 right? So it's really easy to work out what the measure of success is and to identify if sponsorship is moving it. The issue is that we measure in the world of sponsorship to justify the investment we have made rather
Yeah.
than to understand the value it's had. Because ultimately, the sponsorship team's jobs depend on proving that the sponsorship is doing the right thing. So then the senior stakeholder wants it to work because they want their tickets or whatever it is. And I doubt that anyone is quite that cynical, but it is it is measured to justify. And I think sponsorship is probably one of the worst industries, possibly other than some PR, for chasing output metrics rather than
Rather
outcome
than,
measures.
yeah.
And how often do we see in terms of, how many eyeballs this is getting, how many people are going to see this on TV, how many exposures your logo is going to get as it flips past on the shoulder of an athlete, right? All very important numbers, right? So it's very helpful to know these numbers, but does the fact that someone clicks like on Facebook or watches your video on YouTube, does
Convert.
that change anything?
I think that there's also a lack of baking it. I come from you're in a very big business. I'm in a very small business. We don't have a separate sponsorship team, and most of the clients we work with, they might have someone advising, but they don't have that idea of, I talked about earlier, the distance between the customer and we do complicate our worlds a little bit. And what I've noticed is there's a lack of integration of those. Often those sponsorship programs sit in a sort of heralded separate space to the rest of the activity. And it takes a strong marketing leader to wrangle that back in and to challenge their teams that have nothing to do and are not getting any benefit from the sponsorship program to think about, how could you use this within the rest of our work, and how could this integrate through and actually be something that creates, on a basic level, some content, some authenticity, some believability of why AN company
Yeah.
is aligning themselves with that. Because otherwise what you end up with, which is I think the marketeer's worst nightmare, is just marketing bullshit. And that is the problem, because there's no reason. You sort of see these sponsors, you go, what possible interest have they got other than money to be involved with that? And we go back to the beginning, which I loved the way you talked about that feel and that human aspect. What we're all looking for is trust and belief in the brands that we're in. And this is one of those ones where you just think, oh, they're just chucking. The risk is they're just chucking money around. So, and this could be a whole nother podcast as well, but we've got to stay a bit focused on time. And is there any resources? If I was a marketing leader listening to that and I was thinking, God, I think we might be making some of those mistakes. Can the ESA help at all? Is there any sort of connections or resources that you'd point people towards from that space? Because I know you sit on the board. What would you suggest?
Yes, there's a wealth of information on the ESSA website. Loads of thought leadership type papers. But I would just urge yourself to look at what you're doing and
Just be
ask yourself
logical.
the difficult question. And if you're struggling with that, go out and get an external consultant to come in and be that, working directly for you. No one else needs to know about the advice they're giving you. You can choose to ignore it. And honestly, I had consultants who worked for me who told me things I didn't want to hear. Some of it I did ignore because in the bigger picture, you go, I kind of can see where you're coming from, but that's not going to wash. I'm not going to say that. But at least you're listening, and at least that will then help join some dots elsewhere. And I think maybe particularly around measurement and evaluation, I think that is the key area that should be outsourced to someone who is dispassionate and not involved in the decision making, so that you can actually hear what impact you're having and what you could change to make it better.
I think that's great advice. It's great advice. We're coming towards the end of our conversation, and I think we could have done another 2 hours of this, me and you, so maybe we'll go again in the future. And it has been fascinating. It's always tricky because you can only touch on these things. But whether it's sponsorship or digital change or AI change in those spaces, these big topics are things that people are dealing with every day on the front line of marketing. And they're the issues and also the problems that they face to me as an advisor coming in. So I think it's great that we've touched on them. But one thing I always like to do is I like to ask guests if there's been a piece of advice that someone's told you along the years that you hold true, you can pass on, you can play forward, if you will. And if there's something that you still use to today. So I wonder if there's anything that comes to mind.
Yes, so this is one of the things I did think about in the 15 minutes I had while you didn't arrive.
So that was lucky. Lucky I was late.
Because you could get lost in a vortex of thoughts here. But I think the key piece of advice that I've learned and I've heeded and then not heeded and then not heeded and then heeded is do what you enjoy, right? Love what you do. Find the fulfillment, find the balance, find the energy, find the happiness. Those are way more important than anything else. Yeah, don't just stick around in a job or working for someone or a company that you don't like or that doesn't support you, right? Have faith. Don't change for the sake of change, but have faith in yourself and make a change to get a better manager or a better leader or to help you find that joy. Because when you enjoy what you're doing, when you're in a place where you feel safe, secure, psychologically safe, my goodness, the work that you create is that much better.
It's true. It's true. And I can only echo that from an agency side. You can imagine that there's the times when you're working on a project with people that you love and you see eye to eye with and you think, God, we think the same way. And there's the other days where that can't happen, but you've still got to find a way through. So people in the agency world, I think, have trained themselves a little bit to take it on the chin sometimes. But one thing that I 100% agree with, our best work is made when we're enjoying it and we're collaborating. And I think that's great advice. So all that is left is for me to thank you, Matthew, for being involved. Is there any last things you want to share or anything? Can people get in contact with you if you're interested in what you're doing or any last comments?
Oh, of course. I mean, as you probably can tell, I'm always happy to share an opinion. And I think in my older years, I've begun to realize it is just an opinion, right? And it really is about. I've been opinionated today, but it is just an opinion. Other views are completely valid, and I expand my mind by having discussions and having debates with other people. So genuinely, be open, be curious, and don't be afraid. If you have a different opinion, don't be afraid to talk about it and share it, because that's how we're going to move things forward.
I think you've hit upon a key challenge for the next generation coming through. Real talk is something that is a wonderful thing, and it's you don't start by being good at it. And I don't think either me or you were this confident when we started our careers. But by talking to people, by accepting that you don't agree with things and finding a way to express that in a respectful way, that is a great way to work your way forward and to do better and to get promotions and all of those sorts of things. So I think this has been a great conversation, and I really want to thank you for joining us today on the Unedited show. And I hope I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
That's a wrap on another episode of Unedited. Make sure to like, subscribe and turn on those notifications so you never miss an episode. Find all of our updates on your favourite social media and podcast platforms. Just search for the Unedited Podcast.